from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
I can't believe I'm virtual at RSA. What about you, Art?
It's super weird being in my junk room.
We're supposed to be shaking hands, drinking bourbon.
We're supposed to be having fun and partying together, but this is at least I'm in San Francisco.
Yes, I can't say I wish I was in San Francisco. I've been praying that they'd move RSA outside of San Fran for like a few years now.
I still like it here. It's a beautiful day today. It's unusual. Usually it's raining during RSA, but today it's good.
Brilliant. So first, folks, welcome to our live stream. We're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Reddit, and everywhere else there's video, I believe. For those that want to comment, tune in. You guys can do that. We'll try to bring up your comments. Joining me is Art Gilliland. He is the CEO of ThycoticCentrify. You guys are in the middle of a big merger. You guys have a lot of stuff going on. So you gracing me with your presence for this live stream during all the stuff is I'm absolutely grateful.
I appreciate it, James. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, folks, for those of you that are kind of tuning in, RSA is obviously a virtual experience this year for many reasons. We're waning off, and I know a lot of people are considering whether or not to be in person at Black Hat. Art, what's your bet? Black Hat in person, or are you going to do virtual?
I'd like to go in person. I mean, I've had my 2 vaccines now, so I'm feeling pretty invincible. I'm hopeful that we'll get to see each other again and start to be able to collaborate and do the things that being in person just makes it easier.
Awesome. So I want to give everyone a vaccine hack. Your CDC cards for vaccines actually fit in one of the badges.
Nice.
From events. So use your badge from an event, stick your vaccine card. That way you can pull it out if you ever got to get a 3rd dose.
Yeah, and that way you don't have to laminate the thing, because I've heard that kind of ruins it sometimes.
So yeah, 1, it does. And number 2, it's actually illegal to laminate anything from the federal government.
Oh, there you go. Well, I better not do it then. I'm glad I didn't do that yet.
All right. So Art, let's talk a little bit about, you guys are talking a lot about identity, and there's been a ton of discussions around identity from SolarWinds to CodeCov and everything else. Talk about some of the conversations you're having in the industry today around identity, and what are some of the pressing challenges you're hearing?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the thing that has at least I think focused a lot of people on identity security is the transition that most companies are going through to go from their on-premise infrastructure into the cloud. And it's been something we've talked about for the last decade. But you see that transition happening, and some companies much smaller get there really fast, and larger companies still have a lot of stuff on-premise, and they're moving the newer technologies or the new pieces into the cloud. And I think if you look at the whole security industry in general, most of the technologies are very system-centric. They watch what's happening on a server, or watch what's happening on a laptop, or watch what's happening inside your environment or over the network. But what happens when you start thinking about my infrastructure in Salesforce.com or NetSuite, or all of my servers running in Amazon or Azure or Google, you don't own the infrastructure anymore. And so all of those system-level security technologies are sitting in an infrastructure you don't own. And so what are the things you will control as more and more of our environment goes into someone else's infrastructure? You're going to be responsible for your users and what they have access to. And so a lot of the controls are going to move, in my opinion, and I think the growth in the different spaces shows this, they're going to move into identity security. Who has access? Who should have access? How long should they have access? The whole concept of zero trust is about limiting the access to only the things you need at that time when you need them. It's a super exciting time to be in the identity security space, just because there's so much innovation, and the massive flow of infrastructure into the cloud is just causing it to be more and more critical for companies to figure out how to manage it in a very micro way.
So you brought up the idea of the concept of zero trust, and zero trust, I did about 3-4 months ago, I did a LinkedIn survey. So this is kind of like unofficial official.
It works.
Right? Yeah. It's unofficial official, right? So I call it unofficially official. And the unofficially official said that 50% of the industry considers zero trust to be a buzzword. 50% consider it to be an actual security application, a method within security. You look at it as a method within security. Can you help explain how you guys utilize the zero trust concept within identity?
Look, I would say it is a buzzword, right? It's the sexy thing that everybody's talking about. A lot of people want to get there. I think the challenge with zero trust or CARTA or pick your analyst structure is that it's still evolving. It's still unknown. I think the general concepts that I think about when I think about what is it that companies are trying to do, it's I'm trying to put my policies in someone else's infrastructure. And so at the end of the day, if you think that the perimeter is dissolving and data is everywhere and users are remote, which is kind of the world we live in, how do you enforce your policies when you don't own the infrastructure? And to me, that's what zero trust is about, is what are the tooling, what are the capabilities I need to be able to deploy to be able to put the policies that are important for my business and my company in someone else's environment. And so identity is really key to that. I think gateways and proxies are key to that architecture. And so if you look at some of the approaches that organizations are going to have to think about is what is the new architecture for security that's going to allow me to control and put my policies in someone else's environment?
So great point. Let's talk about a little bit more about identity, because a lot of people look at identity and they think it's a person. It's you and I. You have an identity, I have an identity, but it's beyond that, right? It's
moved so much farther. Yeah, it's moved so much farther. Service accounts, and I think the most evolved sort of evolution of that identity security is when you start thinking about DevOps, and you have different containers that need to connect to each other and have to do certain types of things. How do you control what they are, and how do you make sure that the container that's connecting to the other one is really what it says it is and authenticated? And so trying to drive that security even within the operations of an application. And so identity is evolving essentially from Art needs to log into his laptop to Art needs to get certain access to services, or a system that is going to follow a process needs to get accessed for a certain period of time. And that's kind of the SolarWinds challenge. I need to log in to be able to change rules on a firewall or automation. And when you start thinking about identity in that way, it's gone from sort of a on-premise access to services to cloud operations to now even within an application, an identity sort of creating secure connections even within an application. And that's really sort of where we see the evolution of identity.
Yeah, that's kind of like when you look at the evolution of it, though, specifically when we talk about, technology, right? How do you see identity playing a role with, I think, what's probably the most hyped topic this year at RSA and in the industry in general, right? Kind of like software supply chain and software management and your vendor risk assessment. We've seen, from SolarWinds, the impact of victims wasn't just SolarWinds. It was about 100 companies. With CodeCov, we're seeing hundreds of companies,
right?
Not just one. How do we start to address identity of organizations as you're working along within the vendor, kind of like supply chain aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things that is very highlighted by DevOps in general is you have application engineers now,
right?
Getting access to servers, putting up new code because it's in the cloud. Most of this is in cloud, and you're basically being able to augment or change infrastructure just using software. So it's infrastructure as code. Now what you have is a bunch of privileged users getting access to software all the time. And so what we talk about, at least in our company, is, you had sort of the privileged access management, which was your administrators getting access to Active Directory, getting access to a firewall. But now you have sort of the democratization of privilege. Your executives are getting access to sensitive information in Salesforce and NetSuite. And so they should have more controls, auditability, least privilege. So only give them access to do the things they need to do while they're there. And so that's the executive part of it. But then now you have your entire developer community who's writing infrastructure changes as code. I can, as a developer, go in and change the firewall rules in an Amazon container or change it in an image in Azure. And so what you see happening is you need a much tighter level of control versus just, do I have access or not? It's, do I have access? How long should I have access? What should I be allowed to do when I'm there? How audited is that chain of access. And that's just for the people. But now you also have systems that are going to be touching and doing that. And so if I can get control, like in the SolarWinds case, of a system level access to make changes, you need to be controlling and auditing and monitoring that as well. And I think that's where sort of this next level of identity is not just should I have access or not, it's what should I be allowed to do and how audited and monitored are those accesses. And I think that's the evolution for sure of our business in terms of privilege access management, but it's what's going to be critical as we go forward and have a much more diverse and widely deployed environments where our companies are operating.
So we got a question from Twitch here, and I can't bring it up on the screen, but it's on this screen, so I'm going to pull it up here.
No worries.
So Twitch user, I love when people have their privacy setting on that lets me know they're actual security people, right? Sometimes I get LinkedIn user or YouTube user. It's pretty funny. So Twitch user is asking about privileged access management essentially, and so the question goes as such. It goes, when we're deploying privileged access management, what are some of the best practices around really building identity for different groups based on risk?
Yeah. So I think, look, there's a maturity model where people sort of go through with privilege access. And I think at one end, you have completely passwordless, controlled by a system. At the other end, it's just understand where your secrets are. Right. And so go out and discover where they are, because I think what ends up happening is these secrets and these passwords, whether they're system passwords or domain passwords, all these things are kind of scattered throughout the organization in different places. And so what I would say is step one is just collect up and understand where all your secrets are. Know which systems have access, which rules, what rules you're using, and then just start monitoring, auditing what's happening in your environment. That's kind of step one as you go down the maturity curve or up the maturity curve to what essentially becomes completely passwordless at the top end, where the systems are managing access and your users don't actually have the passwords or know what the passwords are.
Gotcha. So when we talk about the cloud, right, and we talk about multi-cloud environments, we look at the different challenges that exist. People are transforming to the cloud at a much faster pace than I think ever before.
They are.
What are some of the identity challenges that you're seeing there, and what are some of the best practices that people should be looking at in order to ensure that cloud misconfigurations and just random identities are out there for people to get access to?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest there's a couple of big challenges with the cloud in general as companies are moving that. One is it's diversity and confusion. And so I think the fact that you have an on-premise environment, sometimes you have multiple clouds, that diversity creates gaps that the adversary uses to attack you. I think the confusion comes from who's responsible for which parts of security in the cloud. And so whether it's, you have Amazon, which has a great security platform, you have Microsoft has great security on the infrastructure, but what are you responsible for as a company? And that's the controlling of access. It's the configurations once you get in there. And so these rules, I think, become confusing for customers. And so I think that's another area to really be clear about what defines the controls you have and you're going to implement, and make sure you understand that line of what the platform is going to provide there. But in all cases, the access and authority you give to your users is your responsibility. And so making sure you're clear about it, making sure you don't share passwords, because we see a lot of sharing of passwords, which is very difficult to manage and right. Actually is where a lot of mistakes come. And then making sure that that you audit and monitor people's access so you can turn back the clock if something bad happens. You can figure it out. You can monitor. You can alert yourself so that your control rooms can actually take responses really quickly when things are not going the way you expect them to.
When you look at the industry as a whole, and you kind of, as a CEO, you're obviously, you're speaking to your own team. You're speaking to a lot of the customers you guys serve. When the conversation around identity comes up, how much of a concern is it for CISOs today, and what are some of the common challenges you're hearing from them around just the whole idea of deploying identity and building this across and selling it across the business?
Yeah. So look, identity is a very hot topic with organizations today, and I'll use some data to just back that up because obviously I'm in identity, so I'm excited about it. So I expect it to be really important, and that it is pretty much what I talk about when I talk to customers. But if you look at the growth in the market and security market in general, identity security is the second fastest growing space behind analytics in security. Within the identity security space, privileged access management is the fastest growing segment. And so almost every organization has got a project to think about how do they standardize their authentication models, how do they modernize the way they think about identity and privilege access in general, because their environments are changing. And they need to be more thoughtful, especially as, again, the democratization of privilege happens with their executives getting access to cloud, the remote users, especially during COVID, and now all their developers basically configuring infrastructure as code. Privilege and the ability to do it seamlessly without creating a lot of friction so their businesses can operate effectively is a very hot topic today.
So a very interesting Twitch comment came in, and it's from Miriam. And Miriam says, I've been talking about identity, but I can't get executive leadership to buy into it, her security executive leadership to buy into it.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? What are one or two talking points you recommend for me to have to speak to my executive leadership? I'm paraphrasing. I'm sorry, Miriam.
Yeah. No worries. Look, I think there's a couple of things that you can use at least in this conversation, and it has to do around sort of the data around breaches. If you look at most breaches that occur, there's a large percentage, like in the high 80s or low 90s of all breaches that start with a breakdown in authentication or identity. And that's typically because somebody gets tricked into giving away their password, and so identity security becomes the core, and privilege elevation is almost always something that happens right after. So the bad guy gets your password and then tries to figure out how to get more access. And that tends to be in almost every breach. If you just go and get that data and share it with your executives, that is key to it. If they want to move to the cloud, again, more focus on how you're going to bridge identity into the cloud. And if you're going to drive that, it's going to be a critical extension to what you do. I mean, the challenge is nobody gets promoted for changing their identity infrastructure. It can only go bad. And so
but you can
see a lot of that challenge. Just adding capabilities on top of, instead of changing the underlying infrastructure, I think is really the conversation that, Miriam, we should be having with executives.
Yeah, I mean, you can get fired for not doing identity properly. I mean,
if you break it, you'll get fired. If you change it and it works well, nobody notices, and so it's hard to get promoted for that.
Yeah, and also just a really important point, Miriam, is you can pull up the data around CISOs that have been fired because of a data breach. I think it's in the 90 percentile. So I don't like to use FUD as often because it doesn't work on me as a CISO.
No,
but it sure is good to know that 90% of CISOs who go through an incident typically get replaced, or how I like to call it, either promoted or moved over to an advisor role
after your 18-month life cycle in role. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the data, identity is and privilege elevation and identity. I think sharing that data, talking about some of the things that James is discussing here around the risk to the company. Identity is almost always at the core. So it's hard to guarantee. I mean, I would never tell a customer, you put my product in and you would have been safe. It's just a level of risk. It's mostly about auditability. It's mostly about visibility, and taking the human element out of it. I think the biggest thing that we should be looking at with identity is how do you take more of the human error away from this and kind of protect users from themselves. And this is a lot what privilege access management does.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So, we've got a few more minutes left on our live stream. Talk a little bit about the merger. You guys obviously, 30 days since the merger between Centrify and Thycotic. And again, you've taken 30 minutes to join me live today, which I don't know how you did that.
I have a very good team.
Yeah, I mean, you must have an amazing team. But
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about the merger and what you guys expect to see from the merger, and what should the industry now expect to see from, you know, this new force that you guys are putting together.
Yeah, look, we think it's super exciting. Obviously, we brought together essentially the number 3 and number 4 player in privilege access management into a strong number 2 that's growing about twice as fast as the market. I think architecturally we're excited because both were early to the cloud and protection of the cloud, and so bringing the portfolios together is strong. I think these 2 companies in particular had strengths in different parts of privilege access management. In the secret server or vaulting space, Thycotic had a very strong product that served what I would call the middle enterprise. And then Centrify has a very strong AD bridging or Active Directory bridging technology that served the largest and most sophisticated. And so bringing them together gives us a fuller portfolio on a platform that we can build to. It helps us address a much larger swath of customers. And so really making it easy for companies that don't have as much resource to bridge into privilege access management, as well as our expertise in the most sophisticated. And so from that standpoint, I think the portfolio is strong. We're super excited about the platform and being able to build to that. And as a company, we're growing fast, and which gives us a lot of resources to be able to invest. And I think more competition in this space is good. And so I think the younger architecture that we have, I think the cloud focus that we have is going to be good for the market and good for competition. And ultimately, competition is good for customers.
Brilliant. We got a question from LinkedIn. It's coming from Brent, who's been on the CISO Talk podcast. You guys should go and check out my episode with Brent. Talks about identity and access management has been a critical security issue for decades. Do you feel we're on the cusp of making identity management easy to implement and maintain for orgs of any size, or will we be discussing options for many years to come?
Look, I think one of the things that I'm excited about for ThycoticCentrify is when you are disrupting a market. And look, we have a strong market leader in one of our competitors who's been around for a long time, like 25 years or so. They started as appliances. But when you disrupt a market, you always eat markets from the bottom up, and you start with the mid-market because those customers tend to be less sophisticated. And so the product has to be easier to use, easy to deploy, very fast time to value. And so part of what we're excited about in this merger is our technology platform was really built for that middle enterprise. And so it's easy to use, deploy, get going, but you get pulled up into the larger enterprise and you add more sophisticated functionality because over time, it's really easy to add more sophistication. It's very hard to make a sophisticated product easy to use. And so we started at that easy to use. And so I am hopeful that what the market will experience with the ThycoticCentrify merger is a very strong competitor with lots of resources to invest, but with a platform that was designed to be easy to use, because even large enterprises have resource constraints, have employee, just staffing challenges. And so products that are intuitive and easy to deploy and fast time to value is what everybody wants. It's just you have to add sophistication as you go up market. And I think we're in a good position to do that and be disruptive.
Before Brent's question came up, and we're nearing the end of the live stream, folks, so just hang tight, but I've got an Azure Active Directory question. So a lot of money's being invested there. Active Directory is the Achilles heel of everything we do, right? Talk a little bit about how do you see identity being managed in Azure Active Directory going forward?
Yeah, look, I think where the directory is, whether using Azure AD or you decide to move over to Okta's directory, which we've seen a handful of customers do, although Active Directory tends to be the dominant directory on premise and then also now in the cloud. I think what you're going to see is it's going to be very similar. It's just a store for passwords. It's the authentication sort of store. But what you want to do is you want to separate and you want to manage privilege outside of that. And so you're going to use it, but you're also going to be managing privilege and the control of access and monitoring and limits outside of the core infrastructure. And so I think that's where we play. We want to be an augmentation to Azure AD or Okta directory or on-premise AD. And we are a place where you can manage privilege, you can manage the escalation, you can manage the elements of your secrets, and we're going to add value in and around that. And I don't think that changes in the cloud or on-premise. It just makes it more flexible.
Interesting. Perfect. So how can people touch base with you? Or what do you guys do? What can people expect to see from Thycotic and Centrify over the next 90, 120 days, 180
No, it's great.
days?
I appreciate it, James. Yeah, so we're obviously very focused on making sure we develop and continue to serve the customers that already are customers of ours. We have on our website, if you go to either the Thycotic website or the Centrify website today, there's an integration page where we do updates. So I just posted a blog about where we are in our process and what's to come. You'll see a stake in the ground roadmap for what we're building towards and what our futures are as the company. And so definitely reach out to us through the websites. If you have account managers, you can contact us that way. We'd be happy to share more information about what we're doing and where we're going. We try to make that as transparent as possible so you can make great decisions about which partners make sense for you.
Absolutely brilliant. Art, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join me on today's live stream. I really do. I know you're really, really busy. And so
it's my pleasure, James. Thank you very much.
Just getting you on here for just a little bit is always greatly appreciated. Folks, you can go to centrify.com or thycotic.com to get more information. You can see a lot more of the timeline of things that are happening there, and definitely check out. I've got a bunch of 20-minute shows with these guys, with the Centrify folks, over on our podcast page and over on our YouTube page. So make sure to go check it out. We talk a lot about privileged access management and DevSecOps, which I think is a really, really big topic. I know that me as a CISO, DevSecOps right now is top of mind.
Big deal.
It's a really, really big deal. Not that identity isn't, but identity is
core in that. I mean, DevSecOps is going to have identity embedded.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I want to address the problem at the root cause, right? So I look at DevSecOps, and you guys have an awesome session that you guys can catch on our YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast listening platform, folks. Talking about DevSecOps, really, really good. And these our RSA content, folks, is not like our traditional content that's 45, 50, 60 minutes long. These are really bite-sized stuff, 10, 15, 20 minutes maximum. So go check it out. 10 minutes while you're eating your sandwich at home, or take a little break, and while you're working out or whatever, give it a listen. It'll really pay its dues, because the stuff you guys have put together has been absolutely awesome. So go check that out. We'll be back with more live streams later today. Also tomorrow, 9 a.m., the practitioner brief right here on LinkedIn, YouTube, and my personal LinkedIn page, James J. Azar. You can go and connect with me there. Art, and people can touch base with you. You're also on LinkedIn, correct, Art? So
I'm also on LinkedIn. You can get me through LinkedIn. You can send me an email at art.gilliland@centrify.com, and I look forward to talking to you.
Perfect. Brent, thank you so much for spending half an hour with us, man. I know you're a business CISO, so getting you for 30 minutes today, having you join me with Art, I feel super privileged. All right, folks, that's it for us here today. We'll be back with a lot more a little bit later. Stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe, and have a great rest of your day, and enjoy the sessions, whatever you're attending on RSA, guys. Make the most of it. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, James.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.